Yesterday we had the Times newspaper saying that Sir Keir wants to build a new rapport with China. He met with President Xi as a result of that. I said yesterday it'd be nice if he built a bit of a rapport with some of the British people, actually, given how badly his government's doing. But what do you make of what he's up to and what he's been saying?
Well, I'm astonished, really, at how they're trying to cozy up to the extent they are with China. You know, bear in mind, this is a government, Chinese government, that is brutal. It's committing genocide in Xinjiang, it's eradicating a whole ethnic group up there. It has been persecuting the Christian groups. It has, it's the world's biggest organ harvester and seller. You just saw yesterday that in Hong Kong, where we had an agreement with them, which the President Xi trashed, they've just they arrested and are now prosecuted and incarcerated a whole group of democracy campaigners now to astonishing sentences. They have Jimmy Lai, who's been in prison on trumped-up charges, now facing the rest of his life in prison for placing a candle to commemorate Tiananmen Square. I mean, this goes on, and they're building a huge navy at the moment and a huge army. They've made it very clear. They put a statement out before they met Starmer. They said that they're, you know, when it comes to Taiwan, when it comes to their position, their system, their views, their beliefs, all the red lines cannot be crossed and cannot be questioned. So in other words, any arrangement, any discussion that happens with President Xi is really going to be done on bended knee, because this is a threat to the global order on a scale which hasn't been seen since the Cold War, and we are looking like the 1930s all along, where they want to possess territory. They threatened Taiwan the whole time, and they are refusing to countenance any discussions at all on that.
No, quite. Let's have a quick look at what Starmer actually said to Xi Jinping yesterday.
I'm very pleased that my Foreign Secretary and Foreign Minister Wang met recently and discussed respective concerns, including human rights and parliamentary sanctions, Taiwan, South China Sea, and our shared interest in Hong Kong. We are concerned by reports of Jimmy Lai's deterioration health in prison.
I mean, I don't know what to make of that, really. It's hard to see anything other than just kind of supplicant behaviour from Starmer there, isn't it?
Well, what you didn't manage to show there, which is interesting, is that as soon as he started to announce that, all the TV and radio, all the media were cleared out of the room straight away, forcefully, by President Xi's henchmen.
Right.
So literally, you hear the first bit of it, you don't hear anything else after that. And that's because the Chinese, as they said in a statement to President Biden, they basically will brook no criticism, no observations, no concerns about what they do inside their country and their ambitions over Taiwan and other territory. Bear in mind, they've already invaded the South China Seas, but they are brutal, that they are the biggest, they have the biggest number of executions in the world. They are a brutal dictatorship. And what Britain does by going over there desperate for trade, when many companies are leaving China because they get their IP stolen, they have anti-competitive practices. They use slave labor, by the way, to cheapen their products. If you look at the solar arrays that Ed Miliband is desperate to put all over the United Kingdom, they're made in China, and they use polysilicon in them, and that polysilicon is made in Xinjiang by slave labor, and yet they turn a blind eye to that, this government at the moment. It's quite infuriating. You can't get them to focus on the fact that this commercial deal at any price will destroy lives and will be responsible for it.
Well, it's kind of ironic as well, as Keir Starmer's government seems to be very happy to destroy, you know, industry in Britain, whether it's farming, whether it's business, whether it's putting national insurance costs up, you know, and yet they're kind of kowtowing to China, where they use practices, as you say, which are quite untenable.
Excuse me. Yeah, exactly. That's the real point we've got here. We've got a government in China that, because it refuses to accept any of the norms, it trashes the World Trade Organization rules, it subsidizes companies. These companies go on to break normal global contracts. It makes sure that using all that forced labor, slave labor, it can put in zero pricing for labor, therefore they can undercut businesses around the world. Even Apple has now moved the production of its iPhones to India because they cannot trust the Chinese. And at the very moment when the water's going out on people's trust in China, Labour government wants to dive into the diminishing pool and make a fool of themselves. This is astonishing. And after all, this was a government, by the way, when in opposition, that highly criticised China and voted to accept the fact that there was a genocide taking place in Xinjiang. Now they've done a complete U-turn, as far as I can make out, and we are desperate for growth. The budget screwed growth up, and now they seem to be intent on getting growth by any means and turning a blind eye to the terrible abuses and appalling behavior of the Chinese government. Do you know that one Chinese shipyard in China today is producing more naval ships than the whole of the United States in 1 year? They are determined to become the dominant power in the world, and authoritarianism will rule.
Yeah, and Donald Trump has already signalled that he's not going to have them produce cheap cars, cheap electric cars in particular in Mexico. He's going to put massive tariffs on them. He's not going to have that. He might let them into America to have plants in America. That may or may not be a good idea. But is this naivety from the Labour government, or is it something a bit more sinister, do you think?
Well, the rest of Europe, interestingly, is also now talking about tariffs on Chinese cars. Why? Because what China has done is it's now told all its battery companies, by the way, they dominate the battery market. Again, the same principles apply. They use slave labor, they subsidize those companies. They told them now to turn themselves into car-making companies. So now you're going to get flooded, and that's the fear of Europe. They'll get flooded with cheap Chinese cars, and Trump's in the same mood. Of course, when we ask the government, well, if Europe is going to put tariffs on, and if America's going to put tariffs on Chinese goods, what will Britain do? And they go quiet. And the reason is because they are desperate for Chinese business. And so the problem is we could end up being swamped by Chinese vehicles and cars, solar arrays, all made, by the way, by cold, dirty formats, oil, gas. The Chinese don't give a damn about what they do in China. And so we satisfy our consciences by buying these things from China because we say they will be helpful for our environment. Meanwhile, they trash the global environment in China. So it's hypocrisy on the worst sort. And we could end up being flooded by these cars and having no car industry at the end of it.
Indeed.
This principle.
And we've already seen China kind of infiltrating the higher education sector. We've got all sorts of chairs of knowledge being bought, by the way, effectively by Chinese money, installing various, China-friendly professors and all that kind of thing. Do you worry that there's anything else going on here in terms of Chinese, spying, almost industrial espionage, personal damage being done to individuals like yourself? I mean, you're on a list, apparently, of people who are, enemies of China, if you like. Is there a worry about any of that?
Myself and my family are sanctioned by the Chinese government, which is that if you enter a country where there's a treaty, extradition treaty, then you might be arrested, that sort of thing. They do a lot of it. They've done a number of politicians on it because they hate us for discovering the Xinjiang genocide. Yeah, on the other side of it, of course, our universities now have become completely dependent on Chinese money.
Yeah.
So they put the Confucius Institute, which was meant to be there to help people learn Chinese and about Chinese culture. In fact, what it does is spies on Chinese students to make sure they toe the line. We found Chinese postgrad students in British defence contracts. No one bothered to check them. They just went straight through. They last about a year in that contract, maybe two, and head straight back to China with all the secrets that they can muster. The security services all say that China is the single biggest threat. And by the way, whilst the UK government says it supports Ukraine, it's busy cozying up to China, but China is busy organising support for Russia through North Korea. Iran provides them drones. This is all part of their axis of totalitarianism, which they have organised. And the reality for us is we are facing a huge growing threat. And I have one simple comment to make to the British government. Stop pretending that somehow there is goodness in this organisation and that somehow they will change their ways. It happened under Hitler. We misunderstood that when totalitarian leaders tell you what they are going to do, as China has done, invade Taiwan, become the major power in the world, build their defence forces up, build up their armies, all of this, they tell you they're going to do it, they tend to do it. And we should stop pretending that somehow cozying up to these dictators works, because it doesn't. Look at Putin. They bought oil and gas from him in Europe and were getting cheap amounts of energy, only to find that he went and invaded Ukraine. But he told us he was going to do it. and we just didn't want to hear him.
Fascinating stuff and frightening as well.